Hello, I'm Rosemary Wong, a developer advocate here at HashiCorp. I'm joined by Armand Dagar, CTO and one of the co-founders of HashiCorp. We've announced some changes to our open source license. And before we get into those, let's just have a chat with Armand. Armand, tell us a little bit more about why you and Mitchell chose to do open source.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Rosemary. I think for us, it was really about going back to when me and Mitchell started as developers. So much of what we learned actually came from participating in open source communities. It was for us an ability to kind of read the source code, get a better understanding of how the tools actually worked, be able to contribute fixes back and add features that we needed for our use case. And so having kind of experienced that firsthand, it really informed our view of the open source community.
There are a lot of different reasons why maintainers start projects as open source, as you and Mitchell did. But there are a lot of other goals to open source as the projects evolve. So could you speak a little bit on the approach that you took as the tools evolved and the communities grew?
Sure. I think first it really goes back to, me and Mitchell's experience of we wanted to enable practitioners to be able to solve their own issues and really be able to get into the source code. So that was kind of first. I think second for us was, our tools in particular are really built around integrations into a broader ecosystem. So we wanted to enable a broad community and a broad ecosystem to be able to build with and integrate with the tools. I think third was really about creating transparency. This is our mission critical infrastructure, tools. They're used in production environments. So we want people to be able to dig in and understand architecture and security and, how the software really works. And I think fourth, we've always believed strongly that great software is not built by committee. So for us, we've always taken a strong lead in the vision and direction of the products. And so I think all four of those really informed our approach to open source.
It seems like it's been a pretty successful approach overall. You created multiple projects and ultimately the company HashiCorp based on these projects. And we've been really fortunate to have a huge community built around them. There are thousands of external contributors and many hundreds of thousands of users. Did the ecosystem develop the way you envisioned?
Yeah, I think by and large, the ecosystem did kind of come to be the way we thought it'd be, right? To your point, huge community of users and contributors and partners that all kind of work together. And I think what that's enabled for us is we work super closely with, the major cloud providers to make sure the technologies work super well in those environments. We work super closely with hundreds of other technology vendors on joint integrations between our products and theirs. And so by and large, yes, I think it's a super successful community. That said, I think there's a small group where that mutual goodwill doesn't necessarily extend, right? And I think what we see is a set of vendors who feel that they can take the open source products and effectively commercialize them on their own without contributing anything back to the broader community.
I think that makes it really difficult to continue innovating as a company and growing the community and making sure that you're a good steward of all of the projects that you've put out there. How does the change in usage affect the way companies sustain their open source projects? Is this something that as an industry we've started to rethink?
Yeah, I think this really speaks to the broader evolution we're seeing in the industry, particularly around sort of commercial open source. I think over the last few years, what you've seen is almost every major open source company has had some form of license evolution. And in almost all those cases, it's been driven by providing more control around how the software can be commercialized to ensure that there's sort of a way for the company and the corporate sponsor to keep investing in that project moving forward. And I think what that really speaks to is, if you have these projects that kind of need that heavy sponsorship of a central entity, how do they do that in a way that makes sense in the long term? And I think what that points to is a change in the licensing approach.
That brings us to our license evolution. How are we changing and what is changing exactly with the HashiCorp approach?
So the change we've announced is that HashiCorp is adopting what's called the Business Source License, or the BSL. This is not a new license. It's about 10 years old, from 2013, and it was originally invented by MariaDB. And what it allows us to do is basically give very broad and permissive use of the source code for people to be able to download it, copy it, modify it, redistribute it, but for us to also be able to put specific restrictions around the commercial use of the product. And so for us, we feel like that strikes a nice balance of preserving the sort of ethos and what we set out to do by adopting open source, while sort of solving some of those challenges as we continue to grow the products in the community.
So I've written a lot of plugins for Vault and Terraform. I use Vault Terraform console on a pretty regular basis. And sometimes I've even written some like small scripts just to build on top of something, make sure that I can automate something end to end. Does this change affect me? How does our business source license affect end users, partners, and customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think our first goal in making this change was to really protect the use cases of our end users, our customers, our partners, and the broader community. And so for the vast majority of use cases, including all the ones you mentioned, there's really no change, right? Effectively, and this is the advantage of the BSL, is that we can grant very broad usage. And so for us, that first goal was to make sure we're not disrupting our end users who are using it for personal use or in production in their internal organization. We don't want to disrupt partners who are building, Vault plugins or Terraform providers or things like that. And certainly our customers, we don't want impacted by this either. And so that was really sort of a top focus. And so all those use cases, effectively, there's no real change.
So just to make sure I'm clear, a number of the projects will not be affected, and they're still going to be developed in the open. Pull requests and issues will still be welcome, and the source code will be available online. In that case, what are the restrictions to a business source license?
Yeah, I think that's effectively right, Rosemary. All the source code will continue to be on GitHub. We'll continue to accept pull requests and interact with the community just like everything's been before. So really the specific restriction here as part of the BSL is effectively the open source or the community code can't be used in providing a competitive offering to HashiCorp. So that means you couldn't take it and say, I'm going to provide a Vault as a service or embed the products in a competitive offering where you're providing substantially the same capabilities as the HashiCorp products. But what that means is if you're using it for your internal use or you're building it as part of a SaaS that solves a different set of problems, all of those kind of use cases that by and large is what the community uses the products for, all of those are unimpacted. It's really only specifically those competitive use cases of selling the core products for those specific capabilities.
Got it. As a community member and contributor, I'm pretty glad to hear that. I'm sure, though, there are going to be a lot of questions on, what is appropriate use and what's not. So how should people learn more about the change?
Yeah, great question. So I think as part of this, we've published a number of resources, right? So I would point people towards a blog post that goes into a bit more detail. There's a set of frequently asked questions that gets into some of the nuances as well. And then what we've done is we set up a mailing list. So if there's something that's not covered by the blog or unclear from the FAQ and you just want to ask, hey, I have this question about how might this apply in this situation, then we have an email that you can reach out to as well and get clarification.
It's great to hear there's an FAQ and there's even a mailing list that I can reach out to if I ever have a question. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that, for more than a decade, HashiCorp's been a huge proponent of the open source community, right? We have hundreds of projects and libraries and, different tools that we've put into the open source community. And we're still going to continue doing that. This change impacts a small number of the overall repositories we have. Beyond that, I'd say we have a deep commitment to our community of users, to our partners, to our customers, and everyone who's really been a core part of making HashiCorp what it is. And that commitment really doesn't change, right? Ultimately, what this change is about is enabling us to continue to invest in the products, continue to invest in the communities going into the future. And so, we just really want to make that clear that, that's really where our focus is and that's where our heart is and, where we're going to continue to invest.
That's great to hear. Armon, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the license changes and how it affects our community. If you want to learn more, check out the resources on our website.